Oofa, the sequel, as the Brooklyn Nets lose their third consecutive game, this time at the hands of the Memphis Grizzlies. Lesson learned, wake up call, must have hit the snooze as they come out flat once again. James Harden and Kevin Durant have off nights. And ultimately, it's a blowout wire-to-wire loss with a little bit of rookie excitement splashed in there, man. Doug, lots to cover here, including some curiosities around rotations, expectations, and whether or not the concerns are growing for Brooklyn.
Yeah, I have a little freak out here about midway
You
through, and
do,
then it kind
a
of
little bit.
extends into the most of the way through about some things that happened in this game because some of this stuff just absolutely leaves your head scratching. We're going to talk about it all, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
That's right. It's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, for better or worse, every single day. I am at Adam Armbrecht covering the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. He is Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR, all your daily fantasy sports rankings, FanDuel, DraftKings. If you need daily projections, Doug Norrie and DFSR is your guy/website. We welcome you in and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Free on all those platforms. Enjoy us. We enjoy you listening. We don't enjoy, however, Doug, the 118-104 loss that the Brooklyn Nets now tally up 3 in a row in the loss column at the hands of the Memphis Grizzlies. This one's ugly. This one's a blowout. We're going to talk about the starters. We're going to talk about the gameplay, the stars, and then get to, yes, the somewhat exciting rookie comeback burst there at the end. But this is a bummer, man. There's some frustration to get out on a couple of different levels, I think, on this episode.
God, did they stink? Oh my goodness. This was, I called I think the Houston game at the time, we called the worst loss of the year. This has to be right with it. It was just bad on basically every level. It's hard to even know where to start. And I'm excluding the comeback thing at the end which we're going to get to, because that was not part of that wasn't an X's and O's thing. That was we waved the white flag and those dudes just had energy, but we'll talk about that. But how it was kind of just like every level bad. The energy level stunk. The execution stunk. They couldn't shoot. Memphis just did everything better. There's nothing that Memphis did worse than the Nets. They smoked them on the offensive glass. They just couldn't get good shots again. And it was mostly just an energy thing, right? Like a lot of this stuff actually just comes down to energy. The Nets, after Durant says all this stuff about coming, he leaves last game and we talked about it. And we're like, okay, maybe they learned something. They didn't come out with a lot of just like effort against the Clippers and they lost. They came out with even less effort in this game, which is kind of hard to even imagine, but they did. The effort level was just a total F.
No, dude, that's to me the brutal part of it is, as you say, you had Steve Nash comes out, it's unacceptable effort, all this stuff. You have the multiple quotes from Kevin Durant, and then it came out and looked exactly the same. And Kevin Durant, this is one of those weird games where he looked as usual Kevin Durant in the first quarter, and then it was like he just forgot who he was in the second quarter on, went 0 of 6 in the second quarter, tried to get it going in the third, but both him and Harden were terrible from the field. A combined, what it ended up being, combined 13 of 40 from the field. And listen, there's all the factors about the supporting cast, the rotation, a lot of the stuff that we talked about in that Clippers game, but for a team with this many veterans, too, by the way, because they went with a veteran-heavy lineup again in this game, I was really surprised by the lack of, to your point, it's the energy and effort, because it's not about the execution piece of it. This very much did feel like just, I don't know, when you have Kevin Durant and James Harden and a good cast, the Memphis Grizzlies are a quality team.
Sure.
But it did not look the way that you expected it to after that Clippers loss.
No, look, you got it. Sometimes you want to boil the game down to stats and say, okay, well, and we said this whole last couple of games, said, okay, they shot poorly from 3. And when that happens, you're going to lose. Okay, well, They shot poorly for 3 in this game too, at 29%. The Grizzlies also shot 29% from 3 in this game. The stat that stands out when you just talk about sort of like hustle, effort, basic basketball stuff is that the Nets allowed 24 offensive rebounds. 24. That just as a comparison, on the season they average allowing about 11, which is already one of the worst in the league. So they're already kind of bad at this piece. They're already bad at the offensive rebounding piece. And then the Grizzlies were able to double up that number and more. I mean, this has got to be. I haven't looked because we recorded this right after the game, but this has to be one of the highest allowed offensive rebounds games like in the NBA this season. I'd be shocked if there was many that were a lot more than it. And that's actually really what the game came down to, because it was just demoralizing putback after demoralizing putback, and you just can't. Yep. And I know what happens. I get what happens to these guys after the 5th time or the 10th time or the 24th time this happens. Like, you run out of energy if you're that team. And that's just how I saw it happen. It's not all X's and O's. They just couldn't get any offensive rebounds, and the second chance points were just through the roof.
No, and it's not a game, 13 turnovers apiece. It's not a game where you were sloppy early with the basketball and gave a lot of free opportunities to the opposition. It's not a game, by the way, I'm just looking at the box score for some of those little things. Nets had 10 blocks in this game. Yeah, 10 blocks in this game. Like, they were doing some good things in some areas, but to your point, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. The box score can get thrown out the window shy of that one very specific stat that you pointed out, where it's just, and there's that compounding effect of that too. It does become demoralizing when you just feel like, it's only midway through the second quarter when they mentioned on the broadcast that Memphis already had 9 more shot attempts. They were shooting 10 to 12% worse from the field than the Nets were, yet they were winning by 10 because they just had more opportunities.
Yeah, they shot 21 more shots for the game. Memphis did, and
Kevin Durant brings that up with consistency every time that they have a bad game or that they struggle or like win a close one late, because they always say he's on the bench looking at the box score actively throughout the game. He always references it. You cannot give up 21 extra opportunities to a team. It doesn't matter how good or bad they are. You're going to lose those games more often than not.
And I thought they had good defensive sequences. It didn't matter after they get the miss and then they can't get the rebound. It's like it undoes all of the good piece they had. They had really good transition defense at times. Durant especially had a couple very key transition blocks, which were good. And I thought, like, overall, short of just sort of not being able to figure out Ja Morant, and I kind of give them a pass for that because he's so dynamic and he's so athletic. But he really he put them in the blender, getting to the rack a lot. And even that I can kind of be okay with. It's just that I thought I didn't think, looking at the way they were playing, short of like the Durant individual sort of ISO drives, a couple being like bad closeouts on him, but he kind of was just shooting the lights out for himself anyway. But I didn't like really think the defensive effort was terrible. It was just that even on good defensive possessions, they would just negate it all by allowing second or third opportunities. And at that point, the defense is kind of out the window because you're already at such a disadvantage because they're already getting the ball under the rim essentially. And so, sorry to sound heated about it, but like, I just find that these kinds of things, like, that's the most frustrating kind of loss to me because it's so preventable. And I just don't know why at some point there wasn't a change. I don't know. Well, we're
going to get into on the back end of this one. We're going to get into the coaching, the rotations from the starting all the way through, because there's a lot of little things about it that I didn't love. And you mentioned even Morant. Listen, Bruce Brown had a good game. He's a part of this little comeback surge ahead of the rookies and stuff. But I thought that he speed bumped Morant for a couple of possessions. There's questions that I have there as well. But first, tell the people about saving some money with Truebill before we get into that rookie surge late in this one.
I'm going to put myself in a better mood here. Truebill. Look, you've signed up for apps. You signed up for services before. You get that free trial. You promise yourself you're going to cancel. You say to yourself, you even set a reminder. Then you go to cancel. It doesn't go through. You forget. Something happens. And 12 months later, you look back at your credit card bill wondering what the heck happened. Get rid of that feeling. Get rid of that stuff by signing up for Truebill now. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, you don't want, or just the ones you forgot about. On average, people can save up to $720 a year with Truebill. There's a lot of these things out there. You sign up for a lot of this stuff. Companies make subscriptions hard to cancel. Truebill makes it incredibly simple. You link your accounts with Truebill. They go about canceling it for you. They're your concierge when it comes to ditching these free trial kind of scams. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now. Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. It can save you thousands a year. Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Locked On NBA.
And of course, you made our show your first listen of the day. Make Locked On now your second listen. It's the Round the NBA look with all the local experts, free, just like our show, and it gives you the insights that only the Locked On Network can provide for you. We now turn our attention to focusing in on the performances of the young players at the back end of this one. It is a blowout. The Nets, by the way, is a wire-to-wire victory for the Memphis Grizzlies, as big a lead as 28, never trailed in this one. So finally, they wave the white flag, and they start inserting a lot of the rookies. The quick footnote I'm just going to put here automatically, because I've been, and a lot of people have been calling for Kessler Edwards. Clearly, he doesn't get in this game late. We all have to assume that there's a conditioning piece coming back out of protocols. So let's just table that to the side for right now, barring hearing something different. But we do get Thomas. We do get Cam Thomas. We do get Daron Sharp. We do get David Duke Jr. out there on the court. Just what are the takeaways from their performances? Not about whether or not we should have been seeing them sooner. Did you like what you got from them in what essentially is a great opportunity for them to get some experience, get some reps, and showcase what they're capable of, frankly?
Yeah, so you get what you want from that group. The energy's through the roof. I can, they bring it back all the way to 10. And then it was like a David Duke sort of drive off a transition from cutting it to single digits. And you felt like that might have been the turning point, because the momentum was really swinging that way. You would hope that this group comes in knowing that they're playing with house money and they play with a lot of energy. Like, I didn't think they played particularly good. I think they played a lot of energy. And I think at that point of the game, when Memphis feels like they have the game in hand, you can sort of see it. It's easy to sort of do that if you're just going to go absolutely 100 miles an hour, which we've already seen these guys be able to do. Like, we know that David Duke Jr. specifically has that in him. Like, he is a very high intensity guy. We know Bruce Brown is like this anyway. Cam Thomas is not that kind of guy, but he still can score. So,
by the way, Bruce Brown is he's the best, because he's out there. Javon Carter comes in as well with the young players. But like when Bruce Brown is driving the lane, absorbing contact from Steven Adams and finishing at the rim, and he just does his patented Bruce Brown flex. I still love that, even inside of what I did not think was going to be this miraculous completed comeback. I'm like, God. Explicit tag,
so it's like
avoided.
Fun. Okay, so
Bruce
I
Brown,
think
you're an animal.
That couple minutes is definitely fun, and it's fun because you and I are texting each other saying, let's start the podcast early. Just kind of pissed off, and they dial it up. They got the Barclays rocking. It's like the bench is going nuts. Everyone's going crazy. They're staging this epic comeback. I think that's cool. I didn't learn anything basketball wise from this at all. Like, even a little bit. I already knew those guys had that kind of energy in them. I know Cam Thomas could sort of ISO score. So I don't think I learned anything, but it made the fourth quarter more fun than it should have been when they were getting smoked.
Well, there are two things that I did learn. And the energy piece, awesome. The scoring of Cam Thomas, like you said. I learned that Javon Carter can hit an open triple if it doesn't matter. That I did pick up on. But the other thing is,
no problem shooting them.
No problem pulling the trigger, boys. One thing I learned on Daron Sharp, he almost fouled out in less than a quarter of action. So I think inside of this awesome thing, you like seeing the young guys play. I still want to see the young guys play. But you also do get this little caveat of, hey, this is a guy that's going to struggle to give you X amount of minutes while avoiding some of those issues. Now, inside the context of this game, it's high energy. You're trying to make things happen. So maybe some of those, are just about going a little bit overboard. But we've seen in his samples that he tends to pick up fouls pretty quickly. So that's something that you kind of couch that there and say, okay, that's why it's going to be a little bit difficult for him. The other thing is, from a Cam Thomas perspective, and we said this, all the indications are he's going to be able to be a perimeter shooter at some point as well. But to this point, he's not. So when he gives you the 4 of 8 from the field in 12 minutes of action over the fourth quarter, 0 of 1 from beyond the arc, only took 1. The irony of what you lack on this team right now in perimeter shooting, as good of a scorer as Cam Thomas is, that's not a part of his game right now. So there's like this little bit of a thing where you go, it's good to have a guy that can microwave score for you. And also it maybe is a little bit of an indication as to why it's going to be difficult at times to say, well, he could be another scorer out there on the court along with the superstars at times. Yeah, in theory, but he's not going to be a spot up perimeter shooter, which is what you need the most of. So that's unfortunately, and it's taking some air out of the balloon. It still looked good. He looked great. But to your point, I didn't learn anything new in an extremely positive direction. I did, though, get a continued sample size that tells us the areas that these guys all need to work on.
Yeah, and frankly, it would have been nice to see some other combination of this a little earlier when it's just so clear the other stuff isn't working. So I think that's it.
Sure.
But and we'll talk about that in a second. I gotta tell you, my biggest problem actually with this, and I feel like among fandom, this is going to be a dissenting opinion.
All right.
At the 5:40 mark, when they pulled this game within 10, you have to put the starters back in. I cannot hear the part. Jump into the YouTube comments. I know people are gonna disagree with this. Like I cannot hear the part where, well, you're the ones that pulled it close, so you get to finish. In what world does anyone think like that? I know that's like a prevailing sort of fan trope to continue to throw out there. It's like, well, the starters weren't showing it and the rookies, and it's their game to close. No, it's not. The rookies did a good job by pulling you back into the game. Now put the real players back in and have them win. Like I will never understand the people that want to just die on some weird hill of like know your place on the team because you didn't come back. What are like Kevin Durant gonna get benched? Like what are we talking about here? Like or keep three of them in and put James Harden and Kevin Durant back in. Like don't put. I'm not saying put everyone back in, but can we put the other two guys back in? Because now we're within 10 with plenty of time left when you have James Harden and Kevin Durant. Like I do not understand. And no one will kill Nash for this because everyone does this. Like every big comeback, just always you keep the guy in. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. You have plenty of time to win the game when you have those two guys on your team.
Well, by the way, the YouTube, and now I'm winded. Thanks a lot.
It's the most gesticulating I've done. I go to YouTube because it's the most hand waving I've done in a single, just like talking about something. It's so maddening.
For a guy with Italian heritage, and if you watch me on YouTube, there's a lot of that going on for me. But Doug Norrie is very stoic in general. But by the way, YouTube comments aren't going to get any better because I 100% agree with you. Because you mentioned that sequence when the Nets are down 10, they can make it single digits. It's off of a great defensive possession. They try to break it out. David Duke Jr. gets caught up underneath himself in the basket, can't make it happen, goes the other way, and it's that next sequence where it ends up being the and one opportunity for Memphis. The next possession down to triple, and then it sends it out to 15-16, and the game's over. To your point, man, like Bruce Brown's doing an absolutely fantastic job. If I'm in that spot right there, I get Claxton, Harden, Durant. The three of them come back in. I keep Bruce Brown out there, and I keep Cam Thomas out there because he was showing that he was capable of scoring on the floor and finding his space. And if you think that you can get some action in the paint with him on the ball, now all of a sudden you're really opening things up for your two superstars, etc. I would have done that immediately.
Sorry, it's even worse. I'm going to cut you off because it's even worse because I actually forgot about this part. At 7:17, they've cut it to 108.89. So they've cut it to 9 with 7 minutes left. Okay. Like you had just taken the guy. So it's even worse. God, I was mad when it was 5 minutes and 40 seconds, but now it's even worse. So I'm not even more mad. It's good thing I didn't realize this. My head would have freaking popped off 3 minutes ago. I'm really annoyed at myself for not tweeting at the time because I did have this active thought at the time was you do not. And I know everyone falls into this trap of yes. Oh, they're the guys. They're the ones. You got to let them do it. No, you don't. No, you don't. Like this is what you all. Your goal with any group of players is to score more points than the other team. That's always
generally speaking. That's how you come into a game. That's the general thought process. Usually, score more.
All right, I'm gonna calm down here. We'll get into some other stuff here, but in general, I'm gonna pop that off here. I'm just gonna cap that off by saying, look, if you disagree, I'd love to hear from it. But there's just no world where the Nets should not have brought the bench in right there.
And you know why, too? It's because when we are going to turn our attention over some bigger picture stuff around this game and rotations, but it's because nothing rewards the effort of rookies better and getting you back in there than having your superstars come in and actually cap the game off, because then everything gets to be the focus of, yes, we were struggling, we had a hard time, and then the rookies came in, they gave us this surge, and we were able to carry it over here, which was a great opportunity for the Nets to have some success there. All right. Let's turn our attention over to the game as a whole, where they started with the rotations and what happened. I mentioned in there in the last segment that it looks like Kessler Edwards wasn't going to be available, so that's technically fine. But at some point, I will say Blake Griffin being the most Blake Griffin performance where he knocks down triples and rebukes a little bit of the idea that you don't have these guys that can hit perimeter shots. I don't know. I can think about other combinations I maybe wanted to see. You didn't have LaMarcus Aldridge available for this game, but James Johnson is not an effective player to have out there the way that they did. And I don't understand regardless of whether it was 100% positive results or a mixed bag, how Steve Nash does not look into these other players sooner. Even the David Duke Jr. minutes, throw him out there to pick up some fouls against Morant. Frustrate him. Tell David Duke Jr. you want him in the game to pick up 4 fouls in 6 minutes just to annoy the superstar scorer on the other team. It felt like Nash had made a decision at the start of this game and did not consider any other possibility until the game was blown out, and now it's a chance to get some reps.
Yeah, we said it in the moment, tweeted about it in the moment that at some point, like in the third quarter, when it's just completely off the rails, you have to just try something new. The fact that these guys continued to play out the string until basically all that there was like a full line change at the end with those other younger guys coming in, because that's when it happened. The fact that happened and there was just no other combination that you could just try, because it's so clear that this thing is just not working. And to some degree, it's the same problems that they had last game. They don't have anyone that can shoot threes. Like Patty Mills he's going to get buried here, but he was terrible. He goes 0 for 6. He goes 0 for 6.
I said that the one thing I did get out in the moment was if you're not realizing that Patty Mills playing 10 minutes above his career average per game right now, played 24 minutes last year. He's playing 30 this year for the Nets and has played 35 and 40 minutes over the last week and a half, or 7 to 10 games, I should say. At 33 years old, we talk about with Durant, we talk about with Harden, that's going to have an impact on Patty Mills, and I think it's bearing itself out in the shooting performances.
That's a great point. I hadn't thought about that, but I think you're 100% right. I hadn't thought about the fatigue factor because we tend to think about that a little bit more with bigs, or at least I do. And I had never really considered that piece with Patty, and I think you are, because you're totally right, because when the minutes that he was playing even before, they were even higher leverage minutes than usual. He's running minutes, but before, when they were missing Harden or Durant, he was the number 2 basically in the offense, which is expending even more energy. So I think you're totally right. We're probably seeing some kind of dip here. Well, frankly, 3-point shooting streaky to begin with, so you're allowed to just miss a lot of shots. I'm not throwing him under the bus here. I'm just saying that when he's the only other guy on the team that can shoot threes with any kind of consistency, and he's going to have another bad shooting game, it's once again going to be an uphill battle. And a lot of the same stuff that we said about the Clippers game is just, and the game before, it's just all the same problems. They don't have any shooting. They cannot generate any shots outside the top 2 guys. The spacing stinks. And you just can't live for that long like this. And those 2 guys are so good that they mask it a lot, but all the problems, in addition to this, they added on the offensive rebound piece to this one, but the other problems were still there too. If you look at the shot attempts from these guys, Durant 2 for 8 from 3, Harden 2 for 7, so they're 4 for 15. Patty Mills 0 for 5. Blake hits 2 miracle threes, so that you just can't ever count on that. Whatever. And then the other ones are all garbage time, kind of like Javon Carter hits 2 and Bruce Brown hits 1. That's just not an NBA. That's just not NBA basketball in the modern era. There's no other way to put it. You cannot survive with this level of inadequacy when it comes to 3-point shooting. It just kind of doesn't matter who you have, including the best, the best, pull-up player in the game in Kevin Durant. It just doesn't matter. These numbers are sort of are kind of alarming with how bad they are.
And we said it last episode about the fact that James Harden is not a career, high 3-point shoot percentage guy, that Kevin Durant does not look to shoot the 3-point ball first. And then on top of that, I think some of the reason too, especially in a game like this, because of the congestion in the paint, when you're working into the paint, a lot of bodies there. The Grizzlies certainly have some thick bodies that they can throw at you. So then there's a breakdown effect of that. You kind of start hoisting some threes, right? A lot of times, especially with James Harden, his 3-point shooting percentage can a lot of times be couched in the idea of, well, when's he taking those? Because sometimes it's is it late in the shot clock and nothing's working, so I'm going to hoist one, end of a half, end of a quarter. He's more than willing to fire up what are extremely low percentage perimeter looks. So I think that hurts him in a lot of ways. Go ahead.
It does hurt him a lot of ways, and that will drive this percentage down, because I get the degree of difficulty on his shots are much harder. His 3-point shots specifically are much harder. So, but they also have another goal in mind, which is to kind of get fouled and stuff like this, to draw contact. And he has other sort of goals around shooting threes. I will say that, to push back on the idea that his degree of difficulty threes are I agree with that. He also passes up tons of catch and shoot 3-pointers because he does not seem to do that. And so that does kind of even out for him a little bit. He passes out an alarming amount. I've used the word alarming not so many times, but he passes up an alarming amount of like he was wide open and he does a hesitation and then there's the closeout's already there and then he kind of does the second pass. So I think he might be able to increase his 3-point shooting if he just chose to shoot some of the easier ones sometimes, but he never wants to do that. So I think that does. So I'm totally here for the part where their degree of difficulty is harder. I think at times he makes that harder on himself also. So that's my only point about that.
No, probably, yeah, because again, his rhythm is on ball and in the dribble. So yeah, there's actually opportunities when the defense is willing to give it to you and he doesn't take advantage of it. I mean, listen, we mentioned this before. The big picture piece of this, we know what's just coming down the road here. There's a couple of things. I'll couch this really quickly just so we get the information out there. They've rescheduled the 3 games that were postponed for the Brooklyn Nets. They increased them and shuffled some things too. A game that was at the end of January got pushed back to February. 4 out of those 5 games end up being at home, but one from last month, December 23rd, the Portland matchup, that gets moved into January on the road, which is where Kyrie can maybe pick up the slack there when he comes back. Also projected that he could come back Wednesday against the Pacers. So when we talk about the lineups and everything else, we know Joe Harris at some point is going to get back here. Kyrie Irving, that'll help. And by the way, out of the 3 superstars, Kyrie's the guy to be knocking down some perimeter shots for you. But is the theme, in as much as we touch on it when we do our podcast, going to be between now and the trade deadline? What does the market look like? How do you get in a quality perimeter shooter? Because even when you get back Kyrie and Joe Harris, I think you have to temper the idea that that's automatically the solve. Now, there's a trickle-down effect of getting Patty Mills less high leverage minutes, and now he can settle back into his role, and the spacing should get better, so the fatigue factor should be less on a lot of guys. But we said it before, there's a handful of players on this roster currently that are basically a zero sum right now. And that's not the way the Nets approached it coming into the season. So you have to assume that the Nets are very specifically going to be hunting down one more key player. It's so easy to say, the 3-and-D guy. I'll still stand here and tell you, and there's things that I'm excited to keep looking for with Kessler Edwards that suggest that he can be some version of that guy. But that's the missing factor here for the Nets. And I don't think it's automatically just because you get Kyrie back and Joe Harris back from injury. It doesn't mean that that's it, because this is not going to be the same roster the way they thought they constructed at the start of the year.
Yeah, I push back on that a little bit. I think that's a lot closer.
We're so lockstep all episode long, Doug.
All right, let's save the worst for last. Like, I think that is actually just kind of a lot of it. But the problem is, like, one, Joe Harris is not healthy right now, so you can't fully count on this. They just push. I think they might have just pushed that timeline back a little bit, and then Kyrie's only there for half the games too, so it's like halfway there. But the thing is that those aren't solvable things, because I just don't. And by the way, we're going to talk more about Kyrie because I think we're going to have word tomorrow about Kyrie specifically, and we'll talk more if that's going to be his thing, and that will be the whole episode tomorrow. So don't worry about the Kyrie thing. We're going to talk plenty about that. But I do think that is most of it, and they probably just need that other piece, but it wouldn't be this specific thing. This is the only reason I'm not freaking out about it. The only reason I'm not freaking about the 3-point shooting specifically is because I do think there's 2 guys that solve most of this problem. It might create other problems elsewhere. Like, it might show you that, because they do get usually decent defense out of these wings. It's just they just have no offense with them.
Right.
So you're just going to give up. You're just going to give up a ton of the defensive end when you have those, because Kyrie and Joe Harris aren't defenders at all. So you're just going to create other problems. So I think that that scoring problem is mostly solved, but I do think it will then open up another problem, which is, like, do they have enough wing defense? And I think that's just a problem for another day. But I'm not as worried about the scoring piece, because I think because Kyrie is just so damn good. But again, he's not going to play home games, so it's like
half the time I won't be worried at all.
Awesome.
The other half of the time, I'll have some other concerns. We'll like you said, we'll dive into that more tomorrow. Bad loss. Reminding everybody, if you're making us your first listen, you have your choices. You can make Locked On Now your second listen. And maybe you can also make a little bit of the Locked On Bets your second listen. It's your choice. It's a buffet of opportunities. Daily, one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. Free. Available on all those platforms. Check it out, guys.
All right. Yeah. And make sure, like we talked about YouTube a ton here, go over and subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. Throw some comments in there. Agree with what we said, disagree with it. It's all good. Try to respond to everyone in there. If you're throwing in there some cool ideas, try to jump in there as well. We've only seen the numbers climb on YouTube. Really, really encouraging. So I'll put the link in the show notes. Subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel.
Hey, listen, man, it's a loss. And that's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. But don't you believe them? Bruce Hornsby.
Oh, it's just the way it is, baby. All right, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.